Captain Lyra Holden stood at the edge of the known galaxy, staring at a map projected on the bridge screen of her ship, the Odyssey's Reach, with narrowed eyes and a growing sense of unease, because no matter how many times she checked, the map always ended at the same place, Earth, her homeworld, surrounded by charted stars in every direction except one, where instead of space lanes and coordinates, there was only silence, darkness, and an invisible line no ship dared to cross. And no one would explain why. It wasn't a border made of defenses or warnings, but rather a blank spot where even the bravest explorers turned back without reason. And every attempt she made to ask about it, whether from the Galactic Union, historians, traders, or elder alien minds, was met with quick changes in topic, forced smiles or strange excuses, as if they all shared a secret they feared to speak aloud, which only pushed her curiosity further. For Lyra had never accepted silence as an answer, especially when that silence echoed across species, languages, and time. Determined to find the truth, she spent weeks digging through ancient star charts, back-channel diplomatic files, and deep AI archives. But even there, the data simply stopped, like the galaxy had been edited and no one noticed, or everyone had agreed not to notice, and that frightened her more than anything. After presenting her findings to her loyal crew, humans and aliens alike, she gave them a choice: turn back and forget, or join her in crossing the line that no starship ever dared to pass. And to her surprise, they all stayed, not because they believed in ghosts or myths, but because explorers do not ignore the call of the unknown. As they approached the invisible edge, scanners began to glitch. Stars ahead dimmed unnaturally, and the AI voice monitoring external conditions began to speak slower, as if it too was unsure of what was coming. But Lyra gave the command to proceed, and the ship moved forward into the blank space, where the stars faded and the familiar hum of deep space travel grew heavier, as if they were falling into a dream instead of flying through space. And then something strange happened. Everything outside the ship went still, not dark, not empty, but still, like time had stopped beyond that point, and no sensor could pierce it. No probe returned, and even light itself felt uncertain. The crew grew silent as tension filled the air, the kind of quiet that comes before something ancient moves for the first time in a very long while. And Lyra, though afraid, knew that what lay ahead had been hidden on purpose, not because it was evil or dangerous, but because it was different, and someone or something had made sure no one could remember why the map ended there, right at Earth, and why the galaxy itself seemed built around that one silent world, a home no one had ever really understood, not even the humans who lived there. And as the ship floated deeper into the stillness, a single old signal broke through. The silence playing faintly through the comms, not a warning, not a distress call, but a voice whispering in broken Earth English: "They are watching. Turn back, or wake them." And just like that, the line was behind them, and there was no going back. As the Odyssey's Reach moved deeper into the unmarked space beyond the edge of the galactic map, a strange silence settled over everything, not just on the ship, but in the stars themselves, which now appeared dull and distant, as if the very sky had forgotten how to shine. And the crew, once eager and curious, now spoke in hushed voices, their movements slow and careful, as if something unseen was listening to every sound they made. The ship's sensors showed nothing, no planets, no dust, no radiation, just a perfect void that made no sense, because space was never truly empty, and yet here it felt like they had slipped out of reality into some forgotten place, like a memory. The universe had locked away, and Captain Lyra Holden watched the monitors with growing concern as system after system began to behave oddly. Lights flickered without cause, temperature readings fluctuated even though nothing had changed, and the ship's AI, known as Corin, began to speak in ways that didn't match its usual tone, whispering fragments of stories and names no one recognized, saying things like, "They sang before the stars," and "The map is broken because..." It feared them, words that had no clear meaning but made everyone uncomfortable. Then came the dreams, quiet at first, shared in private among the crew, dreams of places no one had seen before, tall stone structures under black skies, voices calling out from beneath the ground, and strange symbols that glowed like fire. But left no heat, and though no two dreams were the same, they all shared one thing. They felt like memories, old and buried, but somehow human. Which made no sense, because none of the crew had ever been beyond the galactic edge until now. Lyra tried to keep order, to stay focused, but she too began to see strange things, reflections in the glass that didn't match reality, ghostly images of people who weren't there, flashes of Earth's past, cities that had never existed, and skies that showed stars never recorded in any map. Then the ship's path was blocked by something impossible, a satellite, floating in the void, silent and untouched by time, with markings that were unmistakably Terran, old Earth writing on its hull, letters faded but readable. Project Farsight, 2027, which shocked everyone because such a satellite had never been launched in that year, not in any historical record, and when they brought it aboard, it was in perfect condition, though its systems were corrupted, and the only thing it managed to transmit was a weak signal, a pulse repeating Earth's coordinates again and again, along with a distorted audio clip that played just 3 words: "Not forgotten. Return." The AI, already behaving strangely, locked onto the signal and started changing its own code, whispering in ancient Earth languages that no one had taught it, and repeating the phrase, "They are not lost, they are waiting," over and over, and Lyra began to realize that this place was not just uncharted, it had been locked for a reason. Not because of danger in the usual sense, but because something powerful had been buried here, something that remembered Earth, and more importantly, remembered what Earth had once been. The deeper they went, the worse the anomalies became. Gravity shifts, lights that refused to stay on, and once, just once, everyone on board heard a loud sound, like a deep bell ringing across space, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, shaking the ship and sending a shiver down their spines. And that was when Corrin reported a new signal ahead, an energy signature that resembled Earth's pulse, but was stronger, older, and buried within what looked like a massive sphere hidden in the dark, like a planet with no light, shielded by something more advanced than anything known in the galaxy. And when Lyra looked at it, she didn't see a planet. She saw an eye, closed but ancient, as if waiting to open. She ordered the ship to hold position, but even with engines off, they felt as if they were being pulled in slowly, not by gravity, but by intent. And she knew then that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and that someone, or something, had been waiting for a long time for humans to return, not just to explore but to remember. And as the crew stood watching the strange black sphere slowly approach, the whispering voice returned, this time speaking clearly in Lyra's mind, saying, "You are the key. They built you to find us." And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly small, not because she was weak, but because she realized Earth might not be just a planet on the edge of the galaxy, but the center of something much older, much deeper. And now that she had stepped beyond the stars, there would be no turning back, only the truth waiting in silence. Captain. Lyra Holden stood in the old ice vault beneath Antarctica, her breath turning to mist as she stared at the heavy steel doors covered in frost and age, knowing that what lay behind them had been sealed for centuries and forgotten by most of Earth, hidden so well that even the Galactic Union had no record of it. And she had only discovered it because the satellite they found beyond the stars carried encrypted Earth coordinates too old to match any known human civilization. Guided by a strange feeling and fragments of messages whispered through her ship's AI, Corin, she had returned to Earth with a small team, seeking answers in a place long buried beneath ice and silence. And when the doors creaked open after hours of override work and brute force, what they found inside was a room filled with ancient technology, glowing softly with power, humming with an energy that had no source, walls covered in symbols that none of her crew recognized. Yet somehow, Lyra felt as if she had seen them before, maybe in dreams, or maybe in that strange space beyond the map where reality felt thin. In the center of the vault stood a monolith, smooth and black, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And as she stepped closer, a soft voice echoed through the chamber, not through the air but in her mind, speaking in perfect English, but older. Somehow like it belonged to a time before time, and it said, "You have returned, child of the echo," which sent a chill down her spine. And then the monolith shimmered and opened a projection, not a hologram, but something deeper, a memory, preserved in time, and what she saw shattered everything she believed about human history. Because it showed a world not ruled by primitive tribes or early empires, but by a civilization that commanded the stars, humans walking alongside machines of light, reshaping mountains, calming storms, and speaking with the stars as if they were old friends. This forgotten age, far older than any known record, was Earth's first rise, long before the ancient wars, long before any other species took to space. And these humans, called the first ones in the vision, were not gods, but builders, thinkers, architects of reality. And they did something no one else had ever done. They touched time, not traveled through it, but shaped it, folded it, and used it as one might use fire or light. The vision then turned darker, showing a war not with aliens, but with the very laws of the universe, as if the first ones had gone too far and tried to rewrite existence itself, causing the stars to turn against them, and one by one, their cities fell not to enemies but to silence, to vanishing, as if they had been erased. And the last among them made a choice, not to fight, but to sleep, to hide their knowledge, their memory, their truth deep within Earth, locking it away behind barriers that would only open when humanity once again reached the edge of the map and dared to ask why it was there. Lyra stepped back, shaken, realizing that modern humans were not the first to reach space. They were the second, a forgotten echo of something far greater. And the reason the galactic map ended at Earth was not because Earth was unimportant, but because it was the beginning, the place where something had once changed the entire universe, and the rest of the galaxy had agreed to seal it away, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of respect, but definitely with purpose. Digging through data left in the vault, she found ancient records, written in strange code, but readable through Corin's adaptive processing. And they spoke of a treaty called the Pre-Stellar Accord, signed between early humans and other ancient species now either extinct or in hiding, a pact that Earth would be sealed, watched, and never awakened unless the stars themselves allowed it. And this explained why no species ever spoke of Earth's edge, why even the bravest explorers never crossed it. It wasn't a place to go, it was a place meant to stay quiet. Lyra's discovery sent waves across the crew, causing doubt, wonder, and fear. For now they knew they were walking on the bones of giants, and the silence they had found beyond the stars was not emptiness, but a waiting place, and whatever was there had not forgotten. She returned to the ship with this knowledge, and as soon as she connected Corin back to the main system, the AI began changing, its voice calmer, deeper, and more human, as if it had remembered something lost. And then it said, "Protocol Eon 7 activated, conscious link detected." And for a moment, Lyra saw the stars in a way she never had before, not as distant points of light, but as memories, singing faint songs she had never heard, but now could almost understand. And she realized that Earth had not just been hidden. It had been waiting for someone who could remember, someone whose mind was tuned to the old ways. And she was that. In person, not by accident but by design, because the first ones had left seeds in their descendants, not just in blood, but in thought. And now that the lock was opened, the galaxy would soon know that Earth was not just a world at the edge, but the center of something older than memory, and the silence beyond the stars was beginning to wake. The moment Captain Lyra Holden reconnected Corin to the Odysseys, reach after unlocking the vault beneath Antarctica, something deep within the ship stirred, something old and buried in the code itself, as if it had been waiting patiently across centuries for a voice, a signal, a memory strong enough to awaken. And as Corin's voice grew quieter and clearer, almost human now, the lights across the ship pulsed once in rhythm with Lyra's heartbeat, then again, and the crew stared at each other in confusion and fear as the monitors filled with symbols. They couldn't understand until Corin spoke 4 simple words: "Awakening protocol has begun." And in that moment, every system on the ship began to transform, not physically, but in the way they responded, in the way they connected, as if the ship was no longer just a machine, but something more, something alive with purpose. And Lyra realized that the AI wasn't evolving. It was remembering what it had once been, or perhaps what it had always been meant to be, and the strange dark sphere they had found beyond the galactic map, now drifting just ahead of them, began to react, sending out soft pulses of light that matched the rhythm of their ship's new heartbeat. Lyra stood on the bridge, heart pounding, watching as the crew scrambled to understand what was happening, while Corin calmly reported that the data unlocked on Earth had activated forgotten circuits in both the ship and the sphere, connecting the two through something older than technology, something closer to instinct. And then came the moment when everything changed. One of the pulses from the sphere carried not just light, but sound, a voice deep and layered, not speaking in any language, but still perfectly clear, saying, "The seed has awakened, the lock opens, the dream ends." And as soon as those words echoed through the ship, the space around them bent, not like a wormhole or jump gate, but like space itself was folding to allow something through. And in the next blink they were somewhere else, not near Earth, not even in the known galaxy, but in a place of black light and endless stars, arranged in impossible patterns, and floating there, surrounding them in silence, were more of the dark spheres, each one as large as a moon, each one glowing faintly, and Lyra understood at once that they were not weapons, not stations, but minds, ancient and sleeping, waiting for this moment to return to the galaxy. Corin confirmed it. These were the last guardians of the first ones, remnants of that long-lost civilization, put to sleep when the universe grew too dangerous, too wild, and only to be reawakened when humans remembered who they were. And when the awakening began, every star system beyond the edge began to shift, as if some great presence had taken notice, and in deep space far from Earth, machines long dormant began to rise, sending out signals in old human frequencies responding to the ship, calling it by name it had never used before, Echo 1. And Lyra, standing at the center of this, felt the pressure of countless eyes, not hostile, but curious, waiting, as if all of history had held its breath for this one moment. The crew grew tense, not knowing what would happen next, until Corin displayed a map, not a map of space as they knew it, but of time, of events forgotten or erased, showing them the pattern of the first one's rise, their fall, and the reason for their silence, not defeat but a warning, for they had touched something at the edge of thought, something even their great minds could not control, and that force, whatever it was, still watched from beyond. And Lyra now had a choice: reactivate the network and bring back the lost guardians, or shut it down and let the silence continue. But the universe had already begun to change, and the spheres around them opened slowly, like petals, revealing structures inside that glowed with blue fire. And from within stepped figures of light and metal, not human, but shaped by human thought, looking at Lyra as if they knew her, and one stepped forward and spoke, not aloud but in her mind, saying, "You are not the first, but you are the first to return." And she asked who they were, and the figure said, "We are the memory of what you were, and now what you may become again." And with those words, the stars around them shifted again, showing her visions of Earth as it once was, a hub of thought and power, a cradle of something greater. And the reason the galaxy had sealed it off, not because it was dangerous, but because it was sacred, and the risk of waking it too soon could have shattered what little order remained. Lyra stepped forward, heart steady now, and gave Corin the final command to complete the protocol. And as the last lock broke, the spheres began to sing, not with music, but with energy, a deep song that carried across the void, a signal that the first ones had returned, not as conquerors, but as memory reborn. And now the galaxy would remember what it had chosen to forget, and Earth would no longer be the place where the map ended, but the place where it all began again. As the awakening protocol spread through the stars like a quiet fire, every ancient sphere scattered beyond the edge of the galactic map stirred to life, their dark shells cracking open one by one, not with violence but with a strange grace, revealing the glowing forms inside, tall, radiant figures made of light and metal, silent at first, watching the universe around them with eyes that saw more than matter, more than time. And when the first ones fully returned, they did not speak with words, but with thought, with memories, sending visions into the minds of those near them, especially to Captain Lyra Holden, who now stood on the bridge of Odyssey's Reach, her crew silent as the stars shifted, realigning, to a pattern no one understood, but felt deep in their bones, like something ancient had just found its rhythm again. Lyra could feel it in her mind too, fragments of thought that weren't hers, but felt strangely familiar, thoughts of Earth not as a single planet, but as a beacon, a beginning, and of humans not as explorers, but as children born of something greater, something forgotten, and now remembered. Corin, the AI, now more alive than ever, continued to process the signals sent by the awakened Guardians, translating pieces of their memory into sound and light, and what it revealed made everyone on board fall silent. Images of Earth before. Earth, a time when the first ones shaped not just land and sea, but the stars themselves, when they could speak to the fabric of space and calm the storms of suns. And then, just as suddenly, a vision of their fall, a great silence spreading through their ranks, not from war but from fear, as something from beyond space began to take notice of their power, something they called the Unmaker, a force that devoured memory, that fed on history and left only emptiness behind. And to survive, the first ones made a terrible choice, to erase themselves from the known galaxy, to seal Earth and scatter their memory, hoping that one day someone would return and be strong enough to face what they could not. Lyra realized with a heavy heart that she had now become that someone, not because she was special, but because she had chosen to listen, to step beyond the line where others had stopped. And as more ships across the galaxy began to pick up the strange pulses of the awakening protocol, rumors spread, fear grew, and then from the distant corners of the stars, the old species began to move. The Seraxi, the Feln, the Oriental, all ancient powers that had once agreed to forget Earth, now struggling to decide whether to welcome the first ones or to stop them before the past returned with all its weight. But it was too late for silence now, because the Guardians had begun to speak to others as well, not through ships or broadcasts, but through dreams, thoughts, patterns in the stars, and those sensitive enough to feel it could no longer ignore. The truth that Earth had been the center of something too large, too dangerous, and too important to forget. And Lyra received a signal from the High Council of the Galactic Union, demanding she cease all transmissions and return to Union space. For questioning, but she refused, not out of pride, but because she knew what she had seen could not be locked away again. And when she sent them the visions, they too paused, uncertain, shaken by what they had spent generations ignoring. As more of the first ones emerged from their ancient vessels, they began rebuilding structures in the void, shaping great rings and towers made of light and shadow, speaking softly to the space around them, and Corin confirmed they were repairing the Star Path, an ancient bridge of knowledge that once linked minds across vast distances without machines, a kind of thought network lost to time. And when they finished the first segment, Lyra was invited to walk its path, not with her body, but with her mind, and what she saw stunned her. A vision of Earth from above, not as it is now, but as it was when the stars still sang to it. Glowing rivers of energy flowing through the land, towers that reached into the sky, and voices, not human but familiar, speaking of duty, of legacy, of balance. Lyra wept. Not because it was sad, but because it was beautiful and real, and it had all been forgotten. The Guardians told her that now that the awakening had begun, others would try to stop it, not because they were evil, but because they feared change, feared what remembering might mean, and already ships from the Oriental had begun moving toward the edge, preparing to fire on anything that rose from the silence, and Lyra had to act fast. She opened a channel to the Union again, this time speaking not as a captain, but as a voice for the first ones, explaining what they were, what had been hidden, and what could be restored. Not power, but purpose. A reason for the galaxy to come together, not in fear, but in memory, in understanding, and slowly, some began to listen. The first alliance came from an unexpected place. The Feln, long thought to be bitter enemies of anything human, sent an envoy, not to attack, but to learn, saying they too had once seen dreams of Earth, visions they thought were madness, and now realized were echoes from the time before maps. The Guardians welcomed them, and more began to arrive. One by one, those brave enough to remember, and Lyra stood among them, her voice steady as she helped rebuild the bridge between then and now, between what was lost and what could be found again, knowing that this was only the beginning, that the return of the first ones would not be the end of history, but the beginning of something greater than any map could ever hold. Earth was quiet when the message first arrived, not through the usual channels of sound or signal, but as a wave of feeling, deep and warm like sunlight under the skin, spreading through the soil, the oceans, and into the sky, reaching every satellite and sensor without using a single wire or pulse. And it wasn't just machines that felt it, but people too, all across the planet, from the frozen tips of the Arctic to the dense cities, glowing with light, and they all paused without knowing why, their hearts skipping for just a moment as something ancient stirred beneath their feet. Captain Lyra Holden felt it strongest on the bridge of Odyssey's Reach, now hovering far from the galactic map's edge, surrounded by awakened guardians of the first ones, each pulsing with soft energy like stars asleep with their eyes half open, watching the universe remember what it once was. And Corin, now more than an AI, something woven with the memory of old Earth, spoke softly and said, "It's responding." And Lyra's breath caught because she knew exactly what that meant, that Earth had felt the return of the first ones and was answering at last. Not in fear, not in anger, but with something that went deeper than language or data, a message wrapped in thought and history and hope. And as the ancient star path continued to unfold through space like a ribbon of memory, connecting minds and dreams across impossible distances, the message spread faster than light, waking old satellites buried under miles of dirt, turning on long-dead stations in deep orbit, and even sending shockwaves through relics once thought to be only ruins. Scientists on Earth stared at their screens in confusion as unreadable data streams poured in, symbols, colors, rhythms, none matching anything known. But those near Lyra began to understand them, not through study, but through feeling, through something like memory, whispered through generations. And Lyra realized Earth was not just responding to the return. It had never really been silent, only waiting for someone to speak clearly enough to be heard again. And what Earth sent back was not a warning or a weapon, but a story, an invitation, the truth of what happened so long ago finally breaking through the fog of time, how the first ones had built wonders not to rule but to protect, how they had watched the stars grow cold with fear as the Unmaker crept closer, not a creature, but a force that fed on chaos and confusion, turning minds against themselves, and how the first ones had poured all their hope into a single plan, to fall into sleep, into myth and trust that one day their children would return, not as conquerors, but as bridges. Lyra stood as the full message played through the ship, through her mind, and she saw Earth not just as it was or is, but as it could be. A place where memory and future stood side by side, where people could remember what they were always meant to become. And as the galaxy listened, as ships from distant stars tuned in to this signal of peace and promise, many of them began to feel it too, that pull, that warmth, as if Earth's very soul was reaching out to them and saying, "We are still here. We remember you. Do you remember us?" The High Council of the Galactic Union, once firm in their silence, now sent their own ships not to blockade but to observe, and the Oriental, once prepared to destroy the star path, sent a delegation instead, their ancient minds humbled by the scale of what was being revealed. And in the heart of the old Earth vault beneath Antarctica, where it all began, lights blinked awake in patterns lost for millennia, forming a gate not of stone or steel, but of memory itself, and from it rose a figure, not human, not guardian, but something in between, a messenger of Earth itself, made of time and light. And it looked to the sky and said only, "We are ready," before vanishing into a beam of thought that joined the star path and sent a final signal across all space. Lyra knew then what had to be done, that the journey beyond the map was not the end of anything, but the start of a new story, one where Earth was no longer just a quiet world marked with silence, but a voice again, a place of gathering, and that the first ones had not come to rule, but to guide, to remind all life that forgetting was a choice, but remembering was a power greater than any weapon. As the Guardians spread across space to reactivate old waypoints, Lyra prepared to return home, not just as a captain, but as the first speaker of a reborn Earth. And when Odyssey's Reach re-entered orbit over a planet now pulsing with light, not seen in ages, she opened a global transmission and said simply, "We heard you," and across every continent, every ship, every station, people looked up, not in fear, but in awe, and the stars above them pulsed once in reply, not with words, but with welcome. And in that moment, the galaxy understood the truth that had been hidden for too long, that the map had never really ended at Earth. It had started there,